Don't step on your neighbor. And there we go. Okay, excellent. Good evening and welcome to the New York Studio School's virtual evening lecture series. Tonight is my great pleasure to be introducing Brenda Goodman, presenting on her work. I would like to thank all of you for joining us from wherever you may be, and I would like to thank Brenda for taking the time out of her busy schedule to be with us tonight. I would also just like to quickly recognize those that help us help make this possible. The New York Studio School Evening Lecture Series is generously supported by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the Robert Lehman Foundation, and many individual contributors. As I said, this would not be possible without the contributions of many people, and the Studio School is deeply grateful for the support of all of its programs. Please do consider making a donation either tonight or some other time by visiting the New York Studio School's website and clicking on the donate page. I would also just like, before we begin, I'll just point out that a couple of people have already familiar with the Q&A and the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat at any time during the talk, and we'll leave specific time for Q&A after Brenda's lecture. So with that, Brenda Goodman is a fantastic artist. She was born in 1943 in Detroit, Michigan, and received her BFA from the College of Creative Studies, from which she also received recently an honorary doctorate of fine arts in 2017. In 2015, there was a 50-year retrospective presented at the Center for Creative Studies, as well as Paul Catula projects. Also in 2015, her work was included in the American Academy of Arts and Letters annual invitation, where she received the award in art. You can find Brenda's work in collections such as the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, MoMA, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And she was also included in the 1979 Whitney Biennial here in New York. Most recently, Brenda had an exhibition with Sikkema Jenkins, where she's represented self-portraits, which is closed in February. And before that was a show at Pamela Salisbury Gallery in Hudson, New York, called Traveling Down That Painted Road. And with that, I will just, one final thought from John Yao, who wrote about her recent exhibition. While I've seen Goodman's self-portraits numerous times, the unlikely combination of raw pathos and tenderness always stops me in my tracks. Please join me in a virtual welcome for Brenda Goodman.
Good job, Sam. Bye.
Thanks, Brenda.
Am I on now?
Yeah, you are on.
Okay. First off, aside from not being able to see anyone, which is very unnerving, I have never done a major Zoom presentation, so I'm hoping this goes smoothly and I do okay and you enjoy it. I'm going to start with a statement that I wrote as an introduction. For a lot of my 57-year career, I was painting from the dark side of my life. Whatever hard, painful, sad, hurtful things that happened, I painted them. Having a pretty dysfunctional childhood early on supplied me with plenty to work with. Later in life, I spent a few years in the spiritual community plus 15 years in therapy and by nature, looking inside to understand my feelings. I am always someone who has said how I felt, which would at times get me in trouble. There is no wall between who you see me as and what you see in my paintings. I have strived to always reveal myself as openly as possible. I remember giving my mother a Valentine's Day card where I wrote on it, "If you stopped criticizing me all the time, maybe things would be nicer." I was 14 then. Who says that to their mother at 14? I live upstate in the Catskills with my wonderful partner of 37 years and our dog Raven and our cat Rosie. Throughout the talk, you will see my work go between figurative abstraction, and abstraction. I regret, since my career is so long, I can only show one, maybe two of each of the series I've created in my long career. At 78, I've grown and my work has grown. I feel so clear about the rightness of each new work more than ever before. And though mortality sits in the chair in my studio, I'm still changing, finding new tools, taking new risks, and enjoying the adventure of each new painting. This painting was done in 1961. It was my first year at art school, and it's a very traditional school where you learn the fundamentals inside and out. For example, for 6 months, we just did little pencil thumbnail sketches of still life. And then we were eventually allowed to use earth colors. And then we were eventually allowed to use color. We were always painting and drawing from life. It was more like figure ground for several years. And one of the things my teacher, Sarkis Sarkeesian, said right from the beginning is every square inch should breathe. And I still use that for every single painting I do. In other words, you know, the doll is important and you just don't quickly fill in a background because the doll's more important. Every part of the painting is important and it should all breathe. So that's something I learned right from day one. So drawing and painting from 9 to 4, then to Greektown to draw all the old men in the cafes, or going to burlesque shows to draw the drag queens. Then home, really late, and school at 9. It was a way of life and didn't end at 4 o'clock. And it's still that way.
Oh, you have to click on it.
I have to click on it.
Click on it.
Each
then,
time?
There.
Why?
Good.
This cat I painted in 1970, and I began experimenting with as many different materials as I could to put into the paint. It's just a passion of mine right from day one. In this cat, I mix sandbox sand or aquarium sand because they're both extremely fine into the wet paint, and you could, I'm sure see it in the background. I feel, this is me, everything I say is just me, and you can agree or disagree, but it's my feelings. I feel the more you experiment with as many materials and tools as possible, you then will have more ways to communicate your feelings. I knew years after I painted this cat, it was my mother. And I was a flattened out baby under her arm because she never touched or showed affection. In 1977, I felt it was time to search for a more personal vocabulary. So I created a symbol for myself and everyone else in my world, and it was a visual diary for years of my life. This one was done the year after I moved on the Bowery from Detroit. 1977, oil and wax on paper, 42 by 26. I never lived anywhere but Detroit, and I was really lonely a lot. So I would go to Washington Square Park and watch Philippe Petit do magic tricks. He was the one who walked the tightrope across the trade towers many, many years ago. He drew a chalk circle on the ground and balls would roll up and down his arm. And he had a magic hanky. And in this painting, I put his little hat on the tightrope. So in my imagination, remember my imagination, I would take him home with me and we would have dinner together with potential friends looking through the window. Now, see, if I could see you in person, you probably would laugh at that, but I don't see you, so I don't know if you think that's funny or not. That's okay. I did the symbols for about 11 years, and the dinner was my last one, 1983. You could see actually all the texture in the green and the different ways I used the paint. After I did, this was a symbol painting, the last one, and they got tighter and tighter and more controlled until the point where I was moving those little chopsticks on the table, a 1/16 of an inch, over and over and over again to make it perfect. And I was having no fun. The painting was not nurturing me. And I remembered Susan Rothenberg saying, every time you turn the corner, there should be a surprise. So what I did is I decided to quit smoking. That was a surprise. And it was a 3-pack a day habit. So there was no way I could keep working in my studio with a cigarette. After a year, I pulled out some 6x8-inch index cards, grabbed a pen and whiteout and went to Food, my favorite cafeteria in Soho. I sat near the window and did automatic writing, gestural marks made all over the whole surface. Then I stopped and pulled out the shapes with whiteout ink pens and let it all emerge. I loved the freedom that I didn't have with the symbols. They soon developed into large canvases like this one called Breakthrough, 5 by 8 feet. Every one of these was a surprise because I was just pulling out shapes and letting them talk to each other. A weight had been lifted. Like Claire Grill said in her terrific talk 2 weeks ago, her head is a blank when she paints, and so is mine, though other parts of my mind are also working as well, and I'll explain more of that later. All of the original marks I make on the wood surface are different than the marks on another, so what I pull out from those marks will make each painting quite different. About 8 years after working with those abstractions, I wanted to tell a more personal story that I couldn't with the previous abstracts. So I brought the figure into my work because I weighed about 200 pounds and had a lot of self-loathing. And I wanted these paintings to be a mirror to show me what I needed to change. I carried my abstraction into them, so they were specific yet ambiguous. I had been painting long enough by now to know that these portraits were not a therapeutic catharsis, but strong, powerful paintings that also carried with them strong emotions. At 52, I was the same age when my mother died at 52 on my birthday. I felt angry and I was afraid her bad genes were going to become my bad genes. I wanted the series to be dark and angry. I put the word mother in my head and started to paint, not having a clue what would develop. I started using bright colors, which she loved, not me. And small praying figures emerged in the surface. Everything about it was beautiful and painted beautifully. No heavy brown and black. Something healed doing that painting. All those negative feelings dropped away and I felt loving toward her, and those other feelings never returned. From there, I moved into a series of I call them small spiritual paintings, where that praying figure crept in. And actually, in a lot of my work throughout my whole career, you'll find sometimes praying figures in them. And these were a small series that I loved doing. And you could see some of the surfaces I used. I used Q-tips to draw with. I used washes, glazes, all of the things I love to do with paint are in these paintings. And they're small. This is like a 12 by 28 inch painting. In 2003, I decided I wanted to do another series of the figure. In this series, I wanted to be much more naturalistic than the first ones. I wanted to even more remove the wall between me and the viewer. The first four had head coverings because even though I felt strong, I also felt vulnerable, revealing myself so clearly. And in 2003, when I did these, I wrote a statement specifically about this painting. In this body of work, Self-Portraits 203 to 2007, my desire is to address concerns I'm facing as a 63-year-old woman and artist. Through the process of painting myself, my intent is to extend the parameters of my specific personal issues to reveal and comment on basic universal emotions and conditions. I want to remove veils between myself and the viewer and communicate the palpability of needs met, of needs unmet, of needs never met, of rage, of fear, of vulnerability, of aging, and finally of mortality. My work is about reality, not irony. I just had a show recently at Sikkema Jenkins, and there's 3 of these. I'll show you the other 2 that were in the show. Now I'm going to try and go back on my Zoom here. This one, I want to talk about the technique a little bit. The background is in many, many layers of glazes. Warm over cool over warm, etc., over and over. A glaze is a very thin veil of color over a white surface. And it creates a luminosity and a richness, I think, that no other technique can do. And so that's what I used in the room that she is standing in. And sometimes, and the figure in contrast is very thick. Sometimes I see paintings that have a lot of white in them, or especially when people are working with the figure, and they just look pasty. And I would, just love for them to put some thin veils of glaze over them to bring out the richness and the beauty of the paint. And so I would suggest that to students, actually. In the green one, I used a lot of pumice, which you could get in the hardware store, and I mix it in the paint, and it makes it more matte, and it makes it thick, and it actually dries faster too. And it seemed to work in this painting where it's a darker feeling painting. This one is really heavy, and it's got a lot of thick paint on it. I use wood ash from our wood stove, and I used paper mache in the figure, and I put wood shelves on it, and she's on a shelf with paint on the shelves. And she's holding what I would call a comfort figure. Well, it all started early in life, as most things do. In the 3rd grade, we had to sing in front of the class for our grade. When I started, my teacher said, "No, not you, Brenda, sit down." Bad, bad teacher. So at 60 years old, I wanted to be able to sing Happy Birthday like everyone else. There was no music growing up. Linda's piano teacher gave singing lessons and I took them. Everything I ever sang was flat. It was just monotone. I didn't even know how you do it, anything. And everyone always told me to be quiet. I will tell you that this was the hardest thing I have ever done. Even quitting smoking, which was unbearable, was not as hard as learning to sing. Nothing about it came naturally like painting. Every week after my lessons, I would go home and paint what I felt from the lesson. I did learn to sing it in the restaurant. Now I can just blend in with everyone else. So if you're having a birthday, I'll come sing happy birthday. Or you could think about it. Throughout my life, I have had periods of feeling discouraged about my career. There were good things that happened, but also long plateaus. 2009 was an especially difficult year. I had no gallery. My partner's adult son was dying of cancer, and life seemed in turmoil. I did a series of me dragging my career behind me with a rope. When Linda's son died, I needed to paint the devastation of his loss and did a series called Troubled Waters. We moved upstate because it felt more healing than living on the Bowery, and that was a really good move. Moving out of the city made me feel very isolated, though, and removed from the art community. If it was hard to get dealers to go to the Bowery, I thought it was really going to be hard to get them to the Catskills upstate. I felt depressed and held on tight to hope. Then during that period, I did a painting called Not a Leg to Stand On, 2015. As this painting started, a small child appeared in the left-hand corner, and it only had one leg. She was, and then this red figure just got painted. I did it, but I didn't know it was going to happen like that from one side to the other, and it consumed almost the whole surface. When I stepped back, I said, "Oh, that's my mother and me with only one leg to stand on." She was very overpowering in life, and I grew up feeling like I didn't have a leg to stand on. It was so exciting and gratifying to see this so clearly. Nothing is premeditated, so meaning in them isn't always clear, though like in this one, it sometimes is. After that, I got a bad case of sciatica. So I sat for quite a while and did some small 6x8-inch pieces about the pain I was having while feeling the pain. This is a lot bigger than the piece. The piece is only 6x8 inches, so it's nice to see him big. The following year, Jeff Bailey had a gallery in Hudson, and I began showing with him in 2016. And then he took my work to NADA the following year. I had never been in one of the fairs ever, so that was very special. And he's very special. Sikkema Jenkins saw it there and asked for a studio visit. After they came, they offered me a show the next day. I was thrilled. In January 2019, I had a solo show at the gallery I always wanted to show at. Impending. Whoop. Oh. What am I missing? Oh, yeah. Did I talk about Michael?
Yeah, just go.
Did
No,
I
you
already talk-
haven't, no, you haven't talked about Michael yet.
Something is a bit wacky here. I'm sorry, I knew I wouldn't be able to do this perfectly. I didn't talk about 2015. Should be right here. Oh, God.
Okay, don't worry about it, just keep moving. And you can come back to it.
Then, I'm so embarrassed. Been doing this for like weeks. Oh, well.
There's Michael.
Then things began, I'm going back, sorry. Then things began moving upwards again. Michael David opened the gallery on Bogart Street in Brooklyn called Life on Mars. Joan Snyder, a friend of his, asked her who she would recommend to show there, and she named me. He looked at my website and offered me a show. I began to have a wider audience for my work. Then for the first time, I was invited into the American Academy of Arts and Letters Invitational and won a money prize. Almost a Bride was in the Michael David show, and at the end, I'll show you step by step how it evolved. Oh, I was supposed to stay with that for a minute so you could see it. I was told.
It's okay, you got the next stuff.
Impending was in that show, and the show at Sikkema Jenkins. And this is another where I'll show you from beginning to end how I created it. I began using a linoleum cutter, cutting into the wood surface and using the marks it created. And in the next two, it was also while I was showing, and still I'm showing, with Sikkema Jenkins. My work really shifted at this point, more to the light side rather than the dark side, with brighter colors and more abstract. But soon my insecurity surfaced big time because I was afraid the paintings weren't as emotional as my previous work. But I was assured this wasn't true. A close friend and painting pal said there was still emotion, but they were more about humanness now. I loved that and immediately relaxed. Again, I was assured that all that I am, with all my life experiences, are in the new work too. Then came the pandemic, and I decided to do a coronavirus series, trying to feel the virus as I was painting, using a lot of paper mache to make the virus feel more three-dimensional. I did several of these, and this just happens to be one of my favorites. 2021, this is a small painting, like 11 by 14. I continued going through some changes with my work, and in this small painting I put out a lot of paint when I'm painting. It starts to dry up. It was pretty dry, and I took a big bunch of it and pushed it onto the surface and made that shape on the left lower side, and then created the painting around it. And this is another one, a more recent painting. You've probably seen all of these on Instagram anyway. And I used a thick paint in the lower right, very thick paint, and then put a black wash over it and scratched into it, used different techniques as I, say that I do. Now, I just want to talk for a minute about my little 6x8 paper pieces. This is bigger than 6x8 inches. I usually see them much smaller than on the screen. But, for years and years and years, I would do them, especially when I was having a show, because I love doing these small paper pieces. And they were affordable if you couldn't afford a big painting. But the thing about doing these, and this is especially for students, is if you paint small all the time, and there have been artists that do, and then you decided to change your scale, you're going to have a difficult time. I've always gone back and forth throughout my career, going from small to large, small to large. And if you don't, this scale jump will be more difficult. I've seen artists who work small for years, then go larger, and the paintings seem unresolved and unfinished because they are still using small brushes and they don't increase the amount of time it takes to do a larger painting. Lately, this is last year, I started increasing the size of my paper pieces to approximately 16 by 20 or 18 by 24 inches and began using mat board so I could cut shapes out and insert something else from behind, which you could see on the lower right-hand corner. I also started using tissue paper, which is that beautiful blue shape, but then became very worried it would fade in daylight because tissue paper is not archival. I never used tissue paper, but I started using it and I thought it looked beautiful. But then I got worried that a collector would call the gallery and say it was now a light blue instead of a dark blue and wanted their money back. Now that's where you laugh, but I can't hear you. I found something to protect the surface, but it still made me nervous to continue using it. So I solved the fading issue and began making my own paper using tracing paper with an oil wash over it, and that is permanent and would not fade. In this painting, I used my own tracing paper, which is the green shape in the middle, and the painting became very complex in its space, and sometimes the original marks would become too dominant. I didn't want them everywhere. So you can see on the top part, it's more matte and opaque, where I used a little pumice to hide the engraved marks from the original linoleum cut, just to create more of a contrast. The turquoise is a transparent blue glaze, and the dark shape on the bottom is, on the lower left, is 7, 8, and 9B graphite pencils. And the little shape on the lower right, which some people think is key to the whole painting, I don't know about that, is when we were kids, we would use a bunch of different color crayons on a piece of paper, and then we would cover it with black and then scratch through it. That's what I did with that. I sat one day on the couch and just wanted to do that. And I mounted that on the painting, and it actually became a key part of it. This is an even newer painting. Though much of my paintings are improvisational with a blank mind, many other parts come from a thinking mind. For example, after I made all the marks, I found these pipe shapes on top in the marks, and I painted them, didn't like them that much, and reformed them many times. They still say basically the same shape, but they came a little thinner, a little thicker. And then I was working, what's the right value for them? How many tones? There's a lot of different tones in those blacks and whites. It's not just the black and the white, you know, and putting glazes over them to make them feel just right for whatever that means for me. And there are many formal issues that need to be considered. For example, the scale of a large shape next to a small shape, a straight line next to a curved line. The transparent grays have many layers of thin glazes over them. The transparent squares, which this is my tracing paper that I made, I put those on and took them off several times until it had the angle and the curve that I wanted it to have. So though spontaneity plays an important part, my thinking head paints the rest. Even that orangish pink area up top, I think I painted that for like a day just to get the color that felt right to me. And I don't know how it happens or why it happens, but it just happens. And I'm sure it happens differently with everyone when they feel it's right for them. I am fascinated by what right means to different artists. And it has to do, for me, reaching a perfect pitch for me to feel it's right. And I'll work on it till it happens. I have never given up on a painting. And this last one is a very recent painting. Well, they're all recent, but this is the last one I did before I started working on this talk. Which has taken a lot of time. I love pressing shapes against each other using different techniques to do it. And it's on in a way where everything has to speak to each other. Even if they don't, I'll change it till they do. And this painting has a lot of the techniques I was just talking about. The tracing paper with a wash on it, the red that has a darker red wash over it, the thick paint, you know, in the in this from my palette and then scraped on the left-hand side, graphite on the upper right-hand side, just drawn onto the wood surface. And then the pinkish and red shape, I used a chisel to chisel out part of the veneer on the wood doors. And the glaze on top, that grayish green or blue, you can still see the cut marks from the original mark making. Now I'm going to show you what I consider to be my embarrassing palette, because there's about 94 colors on it. And you might wonder, am I crazy? Since when I begin a painting, I have no idea what's going to happen. I like to be able to see all my colors. And sometimes I'll mix 20 colors to make one color. And if I have all my paints in a big heap, like I see sometimes in studios, and I have no idea even how to see the name of the color anymore, how would I know what to use? I've never done that in my ever. And so it's so much easier for me to just see everything I have and then intuitively go to it because it's right there. And I'm going to, you know, and you'll see a brown container and you'll see a white container. The brown is the wood ash and the white one is the pumice. And I'm just going to quickly read a few of the things that I use to create surfaces. Brushes, palette knives, squeegees cut to different sizes, foam brushes, cake decorators, chisels, Dremel drills, Q-tips, sandbox sand, ash from the wood stove, sawdust, and pumice. Now, I'm going to do two paintings that I'm going to show you step by step how I do them. And then I'm going to be through forever with this talk. The first one is the painting I showed you, Impending, that was in the Sikkema Jenkins show. I start off with hollow core doors from the lumber yard. And these are 80 by 72 inches. And I put 2 coats of gesso, front, back, and sides. And when that dries, I then put a coat of Benjamin Moore Impervo low luster oil enamel. And that keeps everything on the surface. So when you glaze, you have that beautiful light coming from underneath. Nothing absorbs like on canvas. Sometimes you have to paint for like 2-3 weeks to get the paint to come up to the surface so you can actually start making the painting. And with this, you don't have to do that. I've been using this enamel for years and years. It's just something I personally love. So I put that on, and that has to dry real well. And then I take my linoleum cutter from the hardware store, and I just cut into the surface and just spontaneously making marks all over, corner to corner to corner. And then we get this. And this is one of the jobs besides setting up my 90 color palette, this is one of the things I absolutely hate doing. I put black, opaque, but thin black paint over the whole surface. And then I start wiping it off and wiping it off and wiping it off until I get something like that. So all of the black paint's gone except what goes into the cut lines that I put in the surface. And then I put a very light ochre wash over that because I don't like starting a painting with just a white surface. The ochre unifies everything for me. And once this is done, I sit in my chair, and sometimes I can look from a day to a week and be totally overwhelmed by all the marks I made and where to begin. You just have to pick a spot, but sometimes it's not so easy just to pick a spot. So eventually find a spot that feels right, and I put paint on it, and then I put paint on another spot, and then the conversation begins and it starts growing. And in this painting, I found that big black shape to begin with. And it was also a time when I was listening to Trump on TV all the time, listening to the terrible political situation we were in, and somewhere crept into, my painting for a minute because it just felt like we were in a real dark time. And after I put that shape in, I found other shapes, and I put that white shape in, and I really didn't like it. And all these little marks with the color in it, all of those come completely from the marks on the surface. Sometimes I veer away from what's on the surface, but those all come from the surface. And anyway, I did not like that white shape in this painting, so I decided to wash it out. You could still see a ghost of it. And I made that bending over shape. And I liked that better. It seemed like it was beginning to say something. And I developed that shape until what? Until it became that shape. And then I thought that black shape is really close to that shape. What do you think? Oh, you can't talk to me. Okay. But it felt like that shape wanted to hold and comfort something. It just felt empty the way it was. So I made a blackish, grayish, brownish color ball for it to hold and comfort. And that, aside from a few formal things like the brown in the corner angle, and it is done. I felt I finished it. So I was told to have you look at it for a while before I move on to the next one. So I hope you're looking at it. So the last one I'm going to show you is the painting that was at Michael David at Life on Mars called Almost a Bride. And this surface is the one I did before I started using the linoleum cutter. As you could see, the lines are a lot looser and freer. It's a whole different technique. And I used this for years, and this is how this one developed. I, once again, gessoed the hollow core doors, 2 coats, front, back, and side. And instead of using the Impervo, because it was going to be too opaque to have any use for it, I put a thick layer of white over the whole surface. And the gesture was a black wet paint into the wet white paint. And I let that dry. And sometimes it takes a week or 2, but it's worth it because it has a texture in the surface. And then I put a light ochre wash on it like I did the other one. And I sat and I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it like I always do, and found a shape that was like something I might be able to use. And then I put another shape down in the bottom, which I really hated. And it wasn't working, didn't seem like it was going to work in any painting. And I took it out and I started making a black screen on the bottom kind of effect, which I've done before. And I really, really love that feeling of it. And I used little 2-ounce squeezed plastic bottles with a fine point and put thinned out black oil paint in it and just go horizontally and vertically. And it started to grow, got larger. And then I realized I still wanted it even larger. And I toned down the ochre because it was a little too distracting, and started to bring it all the way to the top and leave 2 empty spaces. And then I didn't like that, the green wasn't really beautiful. So I made it more yellow. And so everything was basically there except for that shape that was so much like a cross. I couldn't really see it as anything else, and I didn't like it. And so what I did, which I started to do in the last 5 years, is take pictures after every painting session. And I decided to take this into Photoshop, because sometimes you can put tones and shapes on Photoshop without having to keep putting it on the painting and scraping it off. And I think it's a great tool sometimes if you don't use it too much. And I wanted to do something with those arms that were sticking out, or just change the shape of it. So I took it into Photoshop and I played with it. And in the playing with it, I came up with that shape and those arms. And then I took it back into the studio and I finished the painting. But where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Called Almost a Bride. And then it was finished. And I'm sure one of your questions will be, is that me? Is that a bride? Is that a nun? And I'm going to tell you right now, I have no clue. A lot of times I just say I paint them. I don't really know, except it felt right when I did it in Photoshop, and it looked right in the painting. And it's not a self-portrait because I'm not that tall and thin, and I have really no idea. You could write about it or talk about it, but that's what it is. And the painting was complete. And this talk is now complete. Thank you.
Bravo, Brenda. Bravo.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Do I do something?
What's that?
Do I do something now? Share, do something, or what?
You can leave the painting up, or if you want to stop sharing, it's up to you.
I'll leave the painting up.
Lots of comments coming in.
Can you make yourself bigger so I could see you?
You want to see me?
Yeah, I want to see you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So
I had one mishap there, didn't I, Sam?
but
I lost track.
you handled it beautifully.
It was graceful, wasn't it?
It was
Very.
exceptionally graceful.
Questions?
Just like this Q&A is going. If you have a question, please do put it in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before we need to sign off. But I see a lot of chats come. So thoughtful, true, beautiful, and powerful. Great talk, Brenda. Amazing, Brenda. Best artist talk.
Who's saying that? You told me you would say who sang it.
Carol Diamond, Andrew Gensel, Valerie Parks says, "Bravo, Brenda." But let me see if there's some questions here that we can get through a little bit. And this is an anonymous attendee. They're asking, from your talk, it seems like you have worked consistently through happy times and more difficult ones. As an artist myself, I have found parts of the last few years paralyzing to my art practice. Have you ever experienced this artistic paralysis? How did you work through it?
Twice in all my years. Once, when I quit smoking, I could not go into the studio because I would start smoking because I had to have a cigarette in my hand to think. So I had to stay out of my studio for that year until I started doing the little 6x8" index cards. That was a difficult time. And the only other time I quit working for 9 months is when, don't make me cry, when our, do I have to tell you, who's asking that question anyway?
It was anonymous, so.
That's anonymous. We had an Australian Shepherd for 15 years, and after she died, she was my soul dog. So I was not, in my whole life, except for more recently when the paintings have brightened up and gotten lighter, I painted every single painful thing that ever happened. If it was sad, I painted it. If it was dark, I painted it. No matter what, I painted it. And so that's basically what I did throughout my whole career. So when our dog died, I was shocked that I was not able to go in my studio and paint it. It was just too painful. And I couldn't go in my studio when I quit smoking because I would have started smoking again. Those are the only two times that I wasn't able to. And what I suggest when someone is having a hard time, paint that feeling, paint that struggle, paint that paralysis to work yourself through it.
Mhm.
I always feel you have to paint your dark side. You can't just paint the nice side. That's not what it's about. I couldn't do the paintings I'm doing if I didn't, look deeply at my dark side and be able to put it out there. So if you don't do both of them, you're never going to have that balance in your work. So paint those dark feelings. If someone you love, is hurt, paint it. If you're hurt, paint it. And then you come out on the other side. But you have to have a lot of courage to do that because people are afraid to show that. But look at me, I'm still okay. Sort of. Does that answer ask anonymous if that answers the question?
I think that was a fantastic answer.
Go ahead.
Susan Dakin is asking what artists are important to you earlier and now as well.
It's funny, I chose not to, bring that up in the talk because it's this question people always ask, and in some of my paintings, it's obvious. I was du buffet when I was a student for about 3 years. I did not know how to draw or paint anything but a du buffet. And my teacher, Sarkis, who I mentioned before, said, paint like him, look like him, talk like him, act like him, and then it will go away. So I did. And it eventually eased up. But du buffet has always been in my life. Guston was a major, major, major influence. And Ensor, Gorky, Morandi's on the top of my list. I love him to death. It has nothing to do with my work. You probably wouldn't even guess that, but I just love Miranda. Am I missing anyone? Those are some of my big ones. And I'm a firm believer in letting yourself be influenced, whether it's by well-known artists, not so well-known artists, or teachers. Let yourself be influenced. If you find that it's going on too long, then you have to examine it and find your own voice. But I would never have found my own voice if I hadn't, de Kooning. De Kooning was a big one. I would never have found my own voice if I didn't allow myself to be influenced by other artists. It's crucial. And it's much harder now than it used to be because everyone wants to do something that's never been done before when they first start painting. It takes years and years and years to create a vision and have a voice. And you have to be patient and just let it evolve. Next.
So a couple of audience members are asking about a more technical question. So from Erica Newton, who's a student at the school, and Janice Stabnick, they're asking about the glazes and the kind of what mediums do you use to glaze the white walls of painting? Was this for oils? Can you suggest how to mount paper in your oil tracing papers when adhering to a surface, especially if oil was previously used on a surface?
Wait. First of all, I don't use used surfaces. Are you talking about using an old painting to paint over?
I think she's asking like this,
And glazing.
as you build on that primed wooden
The one
surface.
with the figure in it, with the self-portrait.
Yes. Yeah.
That was just the white of the Impervo low luster white enamel. And then I started putting very, very thin. And the medium I use is simple. I don't use that Damar because that's too brittle and shiny. I use mineral spirits and stand oil. And I have to find the right combination. If you use too much, it's too thick and sticky. If you don't use enough, you can't really glaze with it. But that's my medium. And I'll use a thin veil of a transparent color, brush it on with the soft brush, let that dry, and then put a cool over that. It's always warm over cool, over warm, over cool. And you could build it and build it and build it in layer after layer and layer. And it gets richer and deeper and fuller the more you do it. You can't start on the dark surface because you won't get the light coming through. It's similar to watercolor, actually, because you use thin layers in watercolor and it's on white paper. I don't know if that answers her question. It was a little complicated.
I think so. Justin Kolb is asking, how long did Almost a Bride take from start to acceptance by you?
Justin, why are you asking me that? I don't remember. That was like years ago. One thing I know is, when I had my show at Sikkema, I should say this actually, it took me 8 months to do a whole body of work, and that's a big gallery. You might ask, how did I do that? I will tell you how I did it, because from day one when I was in art school, I experimented all the time. I experimented with tools and textures and surfaces, and I painted mud, because you have to know how to paint mud if you're gonna learn how to paint, but not everyone believes that. So I did all of those things. And I came to a place where when I was painting, I didn't have to stop and take a break for, 6 weeks to learn how to do a technique. I know how to do a lot of techniques. So, and I know when it's not working right. So I can just go more straight to what I want to do because I've already put those things behind me. And if you don't do those things, there's a lot of struggle. And so I don't, so I don't know, I can tell you for a body of work how long it takes. I don't know how long I spent on this painting, it wasn't more than a couple months for sure.
There's clearly a lot of former students making comments. Michael Carney says, love your work and still stretch canvas the way you showed us. Many thanks. But there's an anonymous question that's asking, maybe this is, well, when you have been a teacher, what has been your primary lesson for your students?
Well, the one that comes to mind is sometimes I put a lot of effort into showing people tools and techniques and ways to paint. And I done workshops on it, and then I'll see them a few months later and I'll say, how did that stretch canvas go? Or how did that new surface? You've never worked on wood. How's the wood going? And they haven't gotten around to it. And they probably never will. So what I find, not all students, of course, there's some great ones, but a lot of artists, mostly students, are lazy. They don't want to go through the time and effort to learn certain things that will, in the long run, make their work terrific. They just want to take shortcuts. I'll say, learn how to stretch a surface. You don't have to do it all the time, but don't go to Utrecht and get an already made stretcher that are just god awful and not try other surfaces or stretching your own. You know what I'm saying, Sam?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. So that's one of the things that, I have strong feelings about, and to just keep working. It doesn't come, it took me 11 years to find my own voice. When I was an art student, everything was figure ground. And then I wanted to start using symbols. That was an 11-year period. Ask any of those students that how, if they're willing to take 11 years to find their own personal voice. Maybe 2 weeks, but not 11 years. So, I just think it's a long process, and it's worth it if you do it the long haul, not, skip steps, I guess is what I would say. And always, always paint from your heart, not what's going on around you.
There's a lot of questions here, so I'm just trying to read through them. Jim Condren is asking, what made you begin cutting into the surface of the work?
I don't remember. I use different tools. I guess I was using the doors, and they have a real thin layer of veneer over them. And I just thought, what else can I do with the surface? I didn't want to keep using the thick white paint all the time. And I was in the hardware store, which is a great place to go shop for tools. And I saw a linoleum cutter, and I said, I'll just try cutting into it. And that started a whole new thing going. A long time ago, I was watching Home and Garden. Why? I don't know. I really don't know. But this woman was on a ladder making bamboo leaves with one of those round foam rollers you get at the hardware store. And I thought, next time I was at the hardware store, I got some foam rollers and those. And I started using them and created a whole new way of putting glazes on the surface. And so I always suggest that people go shopping and find tools you've never used before and experiment. Did that answer the question? I don't even know what the question was.
It was about cutting into the surface, right?
I think, I'm always looking for new ways to work. I find new tools, new materials, and I just, that struck me, and that's what I did. And then more recently, I thought, well, I have a Dremel drill. They're small, they're wonderful. I think I'll start putting that to the wood too. So I was combining, the linoleum color with the Dremel drill, and things just build. You just have to keep going out there and searching ways to experiment and find new ways to take risks.
This question is from Laura von Rosk. She says, "Thank you, Brenda, for this wonderful and very generous talk about your work. I love hearing about your process, how you begin a painting. Thanks for sharing photos showing paintings changing over time. Do you have any paintings in your studio that are on hold, waiting for you to revisit them?"
Not right now. The last one I showed you was the last one before I spent the last month doing this incredible talk. So I haven't been back in my studio, but maybe tomorrow I'll visit my studio again. I sold a lot of work from my show at Pamela's, and Sikkema does wonderful with my work. So right now I'm out of supplies. I have to start gathering more paintings.
All right. Let's see. There's a lot of, the time paid off because a lot of people are commenting on how this is the greatest artist talk they've attended.
You can tell me that. You can tell me that.
So maybe just one or two more questions. There's a lot here. I'm sorry if I don't get to them. This is probably the most questions I've ever had in a talk, honestly.
I'll go if they want to stay, if there's, like they're just have to have their question asked, go ahead.
All right. This question it's about scale. And you kind of touched on this, maybe just talking about it more would be interesting. This, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Somaya Natrabile. They say, "This was wonderful, Brenda. You spoke about working small and large scale. The self-portraits that were recently at Sikkema Jenkins were surprising to me in how large they were. Did those paintings start out small? And if so, when and how did you realize that you wanted to be larger?"
I think they started off, those paintings. No, I'm thinking of the period before that. Those were more like 48 by 40 inches, that more abstract self-portrait. That particular series I had some middle-sized ones and I did some small ones, but most of them were that size, approximately 60 by 64 inches. I don't know why, but that's what they thought they should be. They didn't feel like they should be small paintings. I did some paper pieces with that were, the figure was small, and but that particular series, the ones that she saw at Sikkema, were all basically that size. The drawings were 38 by 50, but the paintings were that scale. But I also, at the same time, when I was painting that, did like 11 by 14 little figure. Like I said, it's really important. I've seen really well-known painters who paint a small scale, then have a show and everything's like 30 by 40 inches, and they're terrible because they look unfinished. They're using the wrong size brushes. You don't realize when you change scale, you have to change your tools. And you have to spend more time. You can't use the same amount of time you did in the little one on a big one. So the more you do it, I can go from a 6 by 8 inch painting to an 8-foot painting in the same day and make them both feel okay. Only because, like I am trying to stress to people, I did it over and over again. And then it just becomes natural instead of overwhelming project.
This question is from Millicent Young. Can you talk about the space in your paintings? Sometimes it's architectural, sometimes flat, sometimes almost landscape, like in one of your portraits at your recent show. Also, could you speak about your 5 years of spiritual inquiry?
She doesn't ask much, does she? I can't talk about the space that much. I know that in the last 10 years, I've become more interested in looking at buildings and corners of things and architectural shapes, and just felt like I wanted to use them in my paintings. Why? I don't know. There's so many things I don't know. I don't know the meaning of most of my paintings because they don't come from that place. They come from my intuition. And so if something strikes me, then I start finding it in my paintings. And I love playing off the edges of my paintings, which people who know my work know I work with the edge a lot. So I can't intellectually talk about the space because it's just what I feel. And sometimes people come in the studio and say, oh, the space is doing such an incredible thing. Look how it's jumping out here and going back there. And I say, oh, that's nice. It's just, it all just comes from another place. And the spiritual path I belong to is actually started up here in Mount Tremper in upper state New York. And it was called the Path Work. And it was an interesting experience because it wasn't like, oh, meditation and everything's good and positive. This path made you look at the darker parts of yourself and everybody else, see your lower self. Like I said before, paint your darkness, then you come back to the light, it's going to be different. And so we spend a lot of time looking at the darker parts of ourselves and understanding it, and then eventually looking at the higher parts of ourselves. So I spent a few years doing that, and I had great insights into what real spirituality is, I guess, and also therapy.
Marianne Barcelona is wondering if you work on only one piece at a time or several.
Hey, Marianne. Marianne's an old friend. Sometimes I have a couple going now. There was a time when I only did one at a time. Now I'll have a couple because I've learned to set them aside so I could think about them or walk past them or look at them and not feel that I have to just work on one painting at a time anymore. And yeah, I can do maybe two, but that's it. When I was a young painter, there was a painting I had that was about 50 inches long and 30 inches high. And I did not know how to, my will was a lot stronger than it is now. There was a little area in that painting that I wanted to see the result right away. And I put the paint on and scraped it off until you could barely see the weave of the canvas. And I knew I was, from my will, trying to make it work. And I wasn't going to move to anything else. I just wanted this painting to work. This is another life experience as an artist. And I knew in the back of my head, if I just would go out for dinner with someone, enjoy myself, let the painting dry, come back the next day, it would all resolve itself. But I didn't. And that poor canvas, it was just worn thin in that area. But I know better now. I will leave it alone and then come back at another point. So only about two, Marianne. Two's enough.
Well, this has been really wonderful, Brenda. A couple of people have asked if this will be on YouTube, so I'll just say that it will be. You can just follow the New York Studio School's YouTube channel. It'll pop up. And just a couple of comments, and then I'll sign off or give it to you. But Yael Scory says, "Thank you, Brenda. So encouraging to hear how you never give up. Love your paintings. Listening to you gives me hope." Deborah Sam Peril says, "You're incredibly generous always, Brenda. Thank you." And Kip Kowalski says, "Best talk I've ever heard. I can certainly relate to your childhood and your work as was a way of me getting beyond the surface and finally found my voice. Thank you." So I'm gonna sort of leave it at there and just let you have the final word if you like. But I want to thank you again for doing the talk. This could be your only Zoom talk ever. perhaps, but
Not, I don't see it in my near future, I'll tell you. I spent more time on this talk than I have any one painting ever, almost. It was hard because I'm not 20 years old and I don't have the DNA to do all this zoom and wet transfer and all this stuff. Just doesn't come naturally to me. So it was a bit of it was hard. And I wanted to do a really thorough talk because I know there's things in it that a lot of people don't share. And I wanted to be able to give that. So I hope I did.
I think you definitely did. From the comments, everybody is thanking you for doing that. And so thanks everyone in the audience for joining. It was a great night, and please tune in for future talks. And as Pamela Salisbury says, Brenda, that was such a great talk. You are amazing, Brenda. So thank you, and have a good night, everybody.
Okay. Do I leave now? Do I leave I don't see leave the meeting.
I'll push end and then it'll disappear.
All right. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Brenda. Thank you.
Bye.